We'll get started. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We are the Bionic Blackhawks, Team 2834 from Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, a suburb of Detroit. And it's our pleasure to present powerful scouting with an emphasis here on using Tableau for improved decision making. We've been fortunate enough to be asked to present this or a version of this presentation the past 2 years in St. Louis. And of course, it's our pleasure as being from Detroit area ourselves to present again. Has anybody been with us before, just by a show of hands? All right, just Brian. This is Brian's been here 3 years in a row with us. Okay, so that helps to know. So I'm going to show you what happens when the students are in charge of making the presentation. So my name is Andrew Rain, and I'm coach of 2834. And this is Mr. Kelly Cook, right? You turn around so they recognize you. Okay, so this is Mr. Kelly Cook, who's joined us as well as a team mentor. And this is Shavina, right? And this is anybody in charge of scouting on their team? You'll recognize this look then. Is that correct? Do you recognize this look? Okay. And then this is Mr. Riley Cook, a student on our team in charge of strategy. Riley is in his normal position thinking, right? Thinking what the next strategy is going to be. So what we're going to present to you today, so you know what's in store for you, and this is based on feedback. This is the different elements of a scouting workflow. Of course, you'll as scouters and people who are involved in this will know this, and do something similar in your own teams. But we're going to touch on planning process, data collection, analysis, and decision making. And we broke those up into two different sections. There's what we do for ourselves primarily in a preseason setup time, and then during the competition season. So we're going to touch on each of these four areas. Now, again, so you know what's in store. Based on feedback, we were one of the early adopters of the use of the Tableau visualization tool, and when it was made available by FIRST. And that's when we started to use it and realized that it was helpful for us, and we started to make presentations. Again, we're asked at the World presentation the past couple of years. Based on feedback, we know that we want to spend more time today actually showing the tool itself and some of the things that you can do with it. So today, though, we're going to touch on the planning process and different ways to collect data and different apps and so forth. We're mainly going to just highlight those for you and tell you a little bit about what we do and why. But then we want to get on to show you the Tableau tool and a lot of the things that it can do. And does anybody use Tableau here? Okay, so many of you do, right? I know also the 1640, Mr. Schwenk's team also uses it. And so we're really interested to also hear what you've done, right? And to have this be, quite frankly, a collaborative discussion, because we're quite happy and feel that we've had at least a part in bringing this tool to FRC. So in a planning section, Mr. Riley Cook, if you come up and share.
Okay, so first off, what are we defining planning as in this case? So in this case, okay, there we go. Sorry about that. So what are we defining planning in this case as? And then, well, in this case, we're defining it as criteria for scouting. You don't want to come up there and say, okay, I'm at this tournament. I'm going to find the best robot out there. No, you got to actually have generalized criteria for what you think your robot is going to be best at. And so what I have here is really criteria for criteria, if you will. You don't want surprises at all. You want to be able to have criteria that are able to scout the best robot that will blow your expectations that you thought was physically impossible to build. And you also, on the latter half, you want to be able to scout robots that, well, rather disappointed you in some sense. But overall, you don't want any surprises, because you don't want to be at a competition where you are at a disadvantage for just not having information. So we also have a brainstorming process, as most of you probably have, where we just go ahead and start writing our ideas out on a whiteboard. And then we keep writing these out, and eventually they start becoming rather elaborate, as you can see here. So this is rather comprehensive. So I have here some of the actual.
Back up a minute, Riley.
Back up.
Anybody recognize that chart from your home base? All right,
Yeah.
so now go ahead. So
Okay,
we
sorry about
go
that.
through a brainstorming process as you do.
So I have here some of the actual elements that we decided in our pregame season that we thought we were going to actually collect. But of course, we aren't perfect, and no one really is perfect. So there were certain errors that we had where we indicate here in red in which some things we decided weren't actually all that useful. And also here on in green were things that okay, so well, apparently I'm supposed to give examples now, but okay. Well, for one example we have here is an autonomous. We originally were intending to scout the exchange, and well, overall this actually turned out not to be terribly useful because I mean you're going to go ahead and give a block out into your exchange while you could get a ranking point by putting it into your switch or getting a head start on your scale. So that overall was dropped. Similarly, though, we also have things that we decided needed to be elaborated on, such as actual cube collection off of it being deposited from your exchange directly or directly into your portal, because there were actually some robots that can only get them from being directly put into their robot through the portal or the exchange. And so we decided that was something that we needed to actually add. And then we have in orange is things that we think are still important, but we generally haven't actually seen occur. It could be actually a scouting error that it's just so rare that when it does occur that scouters just don't know how to input it, or maybe they just aren't trained to do it as much because it's also super rare, or it just could be a complete waste of time that we're worrying about. And I mean, there are things that sometimes aren't necessarily just green and red as we have here, and that are orange and will be rather hard to determine whether or not they're useful or not. So right now I'd like to sort of open this up to the audience here with if you would like to share some elements that you may have also brainstormed and decided to remove, or even things you decided to add into your scouting. Yeah.
When we got to hit the championships and the gameplay got better, we actually added time to first scale placement and autonomous, because that was indicative of how quickly you were going to beat the other team with a scale and split in your favor. So we found it to be very useful.
Yeah, we also did something similar, which is the first 45 seconds. Does anyone else want
Can I follow up to that comment? Just for the group, how did you collect the time? Do you know what I mean? How did you measure it?
Our scouters really, really well. And I can't say it's perfect because honestly what they're doing is they're subtracting from the time left in autonomous. But it was something that we discovered became an advantage to teams to do it first on the scale in autonomous, because some of them bumped into it in autonomous and it's always tipped. So we just trained them like in person on how to figure out this time, but we're using the clock time.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
would anyone else like to share something? Oh,
Anything else that you added during the year as you learned as the game went on?
You over there in the very back?
Like the cycle time of one cube, correct?
Okay. Anyone else at all? No? Okay, yeah, you in the purple there? Oh yeah. We also track the actual how high the cube was being placed at and whether or not they can reach that as well. It's some very important information. So now we're going to be continuing on to collection.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. Well, now we're going to be continuing on into collection here, done by Shavina.
All right. Before, sorry. Go ahead. You can go ahead and clap. Go ahead and clap. Just before Shavina goes ahead, as a summation, what we're trying to say here, the planning process, and you had your own whiteboards and so forth, and try to as best as possible to predict what's going to occur. We also say on our team, expect the unexpected, and your scouting process needs to be flexible in some way to adapt to these changes that you discover as the game wears on, or season wears on. And so there are different methodologies. It could be apps and paper and so forth we'll speak to. And so, that whatever the scouting team is, how you have it on your team, our point is just be flexible and expect that during the season you are going to have to change.
Just like we had to change the height of this mic, I'm a little bit tinier than the average human being, but people in the back, there are plenty of seats in the front. I promise I don't bite, so not too much at least.
I can't promise that. Sure, come on up to the front if you'd like.
Okay. So now that we've determined exactly what we want to collect, we go into how we're going to collect it, which is the collection process. There are kind of two main ways in which this is done. One is through pre-match collection, and the other one is live collection. Pre-match collection, let me see a show of hands. How many people pit scout in here? Right? I think it's a pretty common thing across the board to pit scout, and I'm sure all freshmen have done it at one point or another, right? But what's something that we found, at least through this season especially, is that because Blue Alliance and all these other applications have gotten way more advanced over the last couple of years, video scouting is a lot more effective in that we get to see exactly what the teams have done in the past. Of course, you can't do this if you're at your first week competition or second week competition, or the team hasn't played prior to where you're playing them, but it's a great way to see exactly what the team is capable of doing. The second mean of collection, which is kind of what we're going to talk to you guys about in a little bit more detail today, is the live collection, which is done, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with, through paper and Excel. This is a little bit back before my time sometimes,
No, I don't think so.
Sorry. All right. Google Sheets, which is, we're seeing that more and more frequently now because it's a more live process. And then through apps, which is what we personally partake in. Our app programmer's actually here, so wave a hand. All right. So there's a lot of benefits to apps. Number one, it automates the data collection process in that rather than having to manually input something, you're getting it right away, almost right away, as soon as you pull the data from the app itself. You get things like pre-filled match schedules, so it eliminates the human error of the person not knowing what match they're supposed to scout or who they're supposed to scout. And then it reduces human errors in that, like we talked about earlier, you know exactly who you're supposed to be scouting, exactly what you're supposed to be looking for, and you're not keeping track of like multiple numbers at once. And it's easier to transfer, say, to a computer, because I personally we'll move on to this a little bit later and it's a little bit more applicable, but it's easier to transfer it to a computer, like say you're using an Excel file or a CSV file, and then increase functionality. So things like timers, visual cues, line tracking. We've joked about using facial recognition to make sure our scouters are paying attention. So all of these elements are possible as well. And then this is actually our personal app, a few of the pages from our personal app. This is like an exemplar of the visual scouting that you can do. Right now we have the randomization of the scale and the switch, and so you can visually see that happening and scout that happening. There are things like counters, so you can count as they go the success and the failures, or success and the attempts of those who are on switch, on scale, whatnot. And then also you have check marks, so you can convert things that may be yes or no to zeros and ones. And then, of course, things of increased functionality like timers, which are really beneficial for things like tracking the climb time. Now Riley will speak on a few shared applications.
Before Riley goes ahead, so you got some screenshots just of an app that we happened to develop for ourselves. Lots of different options Riley's going to explain. But from show of hands, how many use Excel during the scouting process, right? We have for many, many years, right? Google Sheets, right? Google Sheets, right? Anybody use an app of one or another, right? So what you're about to see going forward, Riley will explain, but when we get to Tableau, the data, however you collect it, can still be used in the Tableau visualization tool. So go ahead, Riley.
But yeah, as Mr. Rain just said, as long as it's like a spreadsheet or something, you can export into Tableau. But with the actual methodology of doing that, you would most likely it's actually far more efficient to use apps. But of course, most of us don't always have time and resources to construct our own app, which is why it's fortunate in our very vast FIRST community that we have lots of publicly shared apps, and especially just on Google Play. And if I remember correctly, FRC Scouters even has one where it's very customizable and flexible to your own design, where you can just simply drop in timers, collections, similar to what Shavina just showed you with plus and minuses and failed successes. And you can customize those things with the actual labels of what you're scouting. And there's also another source, which is Glitch Hub, which will personally rank the code for these different apps. And they'll be ranked for you, so you don't have to go figure out which one's the most optimal. There also is Fires. Now, if anyone knows what Fires is, would you like to raise your hand? Yeah? All right. Could you just explain to everyone what Fires is, just generally? Thank you for that. So that's actually what the actual app function is. But it also is built off of group collaboration with suggestions, and it's a web-based app. And then there's also Thunder Scouts, which we'll pay tribute to, because last year we decided to use that as the base for our app instead of making it all from scratch. Yeah. And then also, actually, are you guys here?
Is Thunder Scout in the audience?
Thunder Scout app.
No.
No? No? Okay. Well, then also, of course, I can't go into every single one that there is, because we simply just don't have time, and also there's a very large amount of them. So we do have a Chief Delphi thread linked here that if you do want to go into and you are interested, then you can. You have it switched over? No?
And just like any other Chief Delphi thread, there's a lot to say. There's the whole point is that there's a lot of different apps available to the community, and we just wanted to highlight some of them.
Okay, so now you have all of this fancy data, a lot of it, and now you have to figure out how you're going to view this data and what decisions you're going to be making based upon this data. So you're into the analysis phase. This is just a tiny, tiny section of the full spreadsheet of data that we actually end up collecting. Actually, this is about half. That includes things like, what match number is it, what color alliance are you on, things like that. But this is a very small portion of it. And so unless you're a supercomputer or a super genius, you're not going to be able to look at this and draw conclusions immediately based on about what you want or what you're looking for or what a singular robot's capabilities are. So we, to make this process a lot simpler, use a program called Tableau. Tableau is a data analysis program that creates effective visualizations that are adaptable to the data. So as you input more data into Tableau, the visualizations that you've kind of programmed or created in Tableau will automatically adapt to the data that's been updated. This is especially beneficial in developing strategies in that it allows you to visualize the scores of your team and who you're opposing, as well as visualize capabilities, like select things that you want to see from each robot. These are a few of the sheets that we personally use, visualizations that we personally use in Tableau. They're really simple bar graphs that you can use, things like, this is, for example, average climb time, so average climb in general, so how many climbs a team does, an x-axis of average climb, and then by team. There's scatter plots, which are really beneficial in seeing the difference, kind of the correlation between two elements. Here we do total climb by climb time. Of course, there's always going to be some scouting errors and stuff, but this is overall. It also allows you to see a little bit more advanced visualizations, things like trends. So here we have each team, and then beside each team we have a value, like essentially a plot of cubes, and then the team's output in terms of baseline, teleop scale, teleop switch, total climb, and autonomous scale are all tracked per match and plotted on their individual graphs. And then a single plot, a best line of fit, a trend line is created based upon each of those plot points. This is especially beneficial in that it allows us to see the improvement of a team, or if a team is getting worse over the course of a tournament. And that's really important because when you're going into alliance selection, if you see that, hey, like this team is left on the field and we know that they have a really great total number, why are they still left on the field? You can take a look at the data and say, oh, they're progressively getting less and less in the scale, or oh, they're switching from scale to switch and people aren't recognizing that. So things like that.
Okay, can I jump in for a minute? Okay, so sometimes in a scouting process or during an event, folks will observe a robot in a single match and see something, and then they'll remember it, right? And they might come back to the team and say something like, "Don't pick them. I saw them." You can fill in the blank, whatever that was, right? And so this is the reason why trend is this chart, which I know is a little bit, if you haven't seen it before, it might be a little challenging to read. We're very accustomed to it because this is how we use it. But there's lots of discovery that we found in this. So this chart is plotting left to right every match in a tournament. And in my experience as a coach, quite frankly, there's always a lot of change that occurs from one day to the next in a tournament. Teams get to work in their pits overnight and come back the next day, and they are really showing a lot better or different than they might have in the prior day. From a scouting process standpoint, we as a team, we get together on the overnight, right, and come up with a preliminary pick list. But sometimes, just because of the nature of an event, there's not a lot of time to go back and revise, let's just say, and you might be missing some very, very important trend data of differences from one day to the next. So this is why we scout up until the very end, right? And a Tableau tool aids in the speed of being able to analyze these big differences. So sorry for that speech. Go ahead. Yeah, so you've set it up for the next slide, right?
No, you're totally good. You're just like,
Thank you.
you're on top of it. Something else that we use that's really beneficial are box and whisker plots. Box and whisker plots essentially do similar to what trend plots do, but they take all these data points from each of the matches, and then based upon that, look at what the outliers are, calculate what the outliers are, what the upper quartile is, what the lower quartile is, and that way we're getting an idea of what the team is performing on average when they're performing at their best, how the team is performing when they're performing at their average, and then also outliers, so events that are almost would never happen but just happen to happen this once. So that's really beneficial. This one is personally a climb by climb time type of situation. And the teams with the smaller boxes and like say less outliers, with the lighter boxes being more prevalent, are the teams that are more consistent climbers who climb in less time. So that's kind of beneficial in seeing that. And this can really be applied to any principle that you're using in Tableau or any principle that you're collecting. Okay, but Tableau can do a lot more fancy, cool stuff as well. I saw the mouse drop, so I'm very happy. Yes, so this is kind of like just a fancier version of a map. So it's all the teams in first, in at least the United States plotted, and their size is determined by their OPR. So it's kind of like a fun way to visualize each of the teams, and you can do this for like a competition basis and know where all the teams are coming from. This is kind of the live version of that. So these are all the teams. You know, we can go to our friends in China as well. It's not just the United States. So it's really interesting in that aspect. Yep. Now decision making. You have all these fancy charts and all this fancy data, and you have to decide what you're going to do with this data, which is where the strategy and negotiation part comes into play. I'm sure that all of you guys are familiar with the fact that strategy and negotiation tends to be one of the main elements of FRC altogether. It's a vital part of it. In particular, Tableau can be used for a single strategy in that it helps us to strategize with our alliance partner, which, as you mentioned earlier, going into a negotiation situation or strategizing situation with data makes your point more valid because the data speaks for itself, and you can back your findings or conclusions with the data or data. Yes. And so, for example, personally, this is one of our matches from state championships this year, where we were allied with 503 and 6548. Are either of you guys in the room? No? Okay. So going into this match, we can tell, because I've been seeing it all year, I just want to explain what each element is. The blue is baseline, the red, orangey color is switch, and then the pink is the scale, and this is all autonomous. And so these are each of the teams and their values for each of these areas. So by looking at a chart like this, you're able to tell who has the best scale autonomous, and that these two teams are even in terms of switch autonomous, and you can make your strategy based upon that. This can also be done for teleop and through other medians for larger values. This, for example, is a chart with our teleop, two different alliance partners. So the red is the red alliance, blue is the blue alliance, and then each of these are the teams on each of those alliances. The green is the exchange. The darker colors are always attempt, and the lighter colors are success. The purple is opponent switch, the pink is switch, and the orange is scale. As you can tell by looking at this, going into this match, we had just a little bit of a problem in terms of scale. So
Trouble for 2834. That's what this
Right.
chart says.
Exactly. Which is great, because at least now we're prepared for the trouble we're about to get into, you know? We're not going in.
But this is, sorry,
Yeah,
but this is the reality, right? I wish the scouting data would tell us that we're going to predict a win every match, but it doesn't, right? And so using the data objectively, have to go with the alliance partners and come up with some different type of an approach that may be able to win the match. Obviously, this is the point. Go ahead, Shireen.
And then this is my personal favorite use for Tableau during alliance selection. It comes really in handy in that you already have a preliminary list created. This is a list that you'll kind of establish during preseason about what exactly you want in a robot, and then you'll also establish it throughout the tournament based upon the data you have for yourself, what exactly you need in an alliance partner to be successful. Say you know that you're weak in scale, you know that the alliance partner that you want is going to have to be really strong in scale to make up for you. In this area, Tableau is really beneficial in that it helps us to create that list of a list of elements, a list of exactly what you want in each of the robots, and you can visualize that in a kind of live scenario. This is, for example, this is kind of what we showed you earlier with the climb box and whisker plot. This is a scale box and whisker plot, and what this does is it shows us who is the most efficient and consistent in placing cubes in the scale, and that's really beneficial in terms of understanding what teams have the best scale outputs. Right? So then we can do the same thing with any other element, like say you're looking into autonomous. You can kind of rank the teams based on what their autonomous output is and total it up using a bar graph. And the same can be done with all the different elements of the game, including scale output, climb outputs. And we'll kind of go a little bit deeper into that during our live Tableau, which is coming right up. Actually, yes, it's up. So now I just kind of to give you guys a better idea of the versatility and like ability that you gain with Tableau, I'm going to go through kind of a live Tableau session. So this is based upon the Michigan State Championships. Can I see a show of hands of who attended Michigan State? Yeah, so anyone off of?
Ford.
Ford.
Anybody else on Ford? Who was there?
Who's that?
Oh, okay, very good.
Okay. And so you guys will probably see them on our charts as well today. Yep, so.
All right, let's see if you agree or not.
Yes, yeah. This is a little hard for a parent team, right? Sometimes to look at data. So this is how, ignoring all of this, this is kind of how our alliances ended up. 2771 was in first, 85 was in second, 4003 was in fourth, 2834, that's us, we were in fourth. I said third. 4003 was in third. And so kind of, we were going into alliance selection with a rough idea of being an alliance captain. So now it was time for us to take a look at the data. This is one of the main charts that I like to use, at least out on the field, especially when you're already up there, because it gives us a comprehensive view of each of the capabilities of the teams. You can also sort this so that it's from greatest output to like least output, roughly. So that's great. Sorry, I'm just doing this live as we go. Okay, so now we have an idea of what each team ranks in terms of these areas, and we see that 2771 is our first alliance captain. We see where they fall in terms of scale, and we see where they fall in terms of autonomous. And unfortunately, they did not pick us, so we can eliminate them. We don't need you anyway, whatever. So, okay, now by clicking on that button, I've eliminated them from the list of people that are still out on the field and the teams that are shown in these visualizations. And now we're down to now we're down to 85. So 85 is down here.
Shavina. 2771 did ask someone to join them.
Yes, 2771. I'm so sorry. 2771 is down here. If they, just in case they go up against 2075 and 4003, I'm sure they wanted another scale robot, and we've seen that teams are picking scale robots first, right? So they ended up picking 35, 38, which is also up there in terms of scale, right? And so 2 of the best scale robots were gone.
There's one prior step.
Oh. Yeah. So they picked 4003, who has one of the best scale outputs on the field, as well as a really, really high scale autonomous output. So, and then they declined, right? I'm sorry. They declined, and so 2771 ended up picking 3538, one of the next highest scale output robots on the field. So 3538 is also out of the running when we're out on the field. Next is 85. 85 is another alliance captain, the second alliance captain. 85 ends up picking
207. Who's up top? 2075.
Yes.
Right.
2075. And so now 2075 is gone as well. So 4003 is number 3. They've already said no to 2771, and so now they have to make their pick. And they end up picking the next best scale robot, which is 3098. So 3098 is off the field. And 3098, as you can, also had a really consistent climb. There are other elements, but we're not looking at these elements right now. We'll kind of show you those as we get to our point. Then there's 4003. They're also gone because they were.
Okay, so you hold up right there after you eliminate 4003, and if I can jump in, one of the what Shavina is doing, right? We're just trying to highlight the use of Tableau during the alliance selection process. Sometimes students, teams, they'll create their pick list, right? It's on paper, it's written. It could be written 4 or 5 different times, cross out. So I didn't mean that. This one goes up here, and don't pick me unless there's this circumstance. We all understand. We do it as well, right? But the usefulness of Tableau is that we have the laptop out on the field as this is going on, and if you keep track of what's going on, you just eliminate the teams one by one as they're becoming not available to you. So next up is team 2834. What do you say, 2834? Don't tell the group. Let's have the group pick based on the data. What should 2834 do?
Okay, so first off, point out a few things before we open it up to you guys. So we're right here in terms of scale, right? Our autonomous is over here. I'll just reiterate that autonomous, the red is switch, and then the pink is scale. So that's our autonomous. We have an all right climb in this tournament, right? We're up here. Actually, we're pretty consistent out of everyone who's left on the field. And over in terms of all the other elements without the scale, which means the green is the exchange, pink is the switch, and the purple is opponent switch. We are, let's see if anyone can find us before me. Right here, yeah. So we're down there. So now that you guys have these data points, who would you pick? Let's have a show of hands. Yes?
I would personally pick 503.
Could I get a reason?
Because they have a very high scale output, and I noticed there's that data. So you have a very consistent switch auto, while 503 can complement that with a scale up, the scale auto, and they can also climb consistently, which you guys do have a more consistent climb. I don't know if
anyone else
Any
have
others?
any? Yeah. No? Well, you're right. So, so that was good. Yes, we ended up picking 503, who has fantastic scale autonomous. And so now we have the scale and switch in our, oh, where are we? Okay, yeah. Now we have the scale and the switch in autonomous, and we've also have a pretty good scale output, and we can go into the match a little bit more comfortable with where we stand. And these teams are left on the field. Should I go through the rest, or do you think this is? Yep. The nice thing about this is, at the same time that I'm doing this, I can go ahead and check things like, hey, okay, let's take a look at their, if they're consistent or not on the scale. As you see, this has already been eliminated, but say we include 503 back into this running. 503 has, this is, by the way, down this line is the teleop scale success, so the higher cube averages that they're getting. And then the 503, as you see, has one outlier where they did 0 in one match. And then you have a few outliers here. But overall, they're doing, their upper hinge is 4. So when they're performing at their best, they're really getting about 4 cubes a match. And that was really attractive for us going into a tournament at Michigan State. Yes?
This is a good question, and we should you know, show how you can use Tableau to figure that out. So go ahead.
Okay, so when it gets down to number 3, you're left with basically a list of who is left on the field, right? Should I go through and eliminate everyone who's left on the field?
If you can do it quickly, you
Okay.
can.
All right, let me do that then.
Well, I mean, it's always who's left, right? If
Right.
you want to go through the first round, but the point would be if it depends on what. If you said I'm looking for X because I already have Y, this Tableau tool allows you to cut and sort by whatever that is. If you say I have a weakness in climbing, right? It's there. If I have a weakness in autonomous switch, it would be there for you to sort by that.
Yeah, and then there's also the fact that, like, once you get down to the nitty-gritty of things, it starts becoming to the point where the robots start, like, if they're only getting like 2 to 3 cubes, well, like 2 cubes into the scale, then you have to start thinking, is this actual objective worth it to be focusing on now? Is it the other aspects of the robot more attractive to us? And so you start looking at those things, and normally we put it into like a whisker plot to see like how consistent they are on like the exchange or just simply the switch or opponent switch, whichever one was more attractive to these particular lines. Because every competition is different in terms of which was your second pick and then what's your third pick. Or if you want to help your opponent, sorry, you're not your opponent, but your captain, and you come up here, you can also help your captain. So.
You're trying
Okay.
to get down to this was our second selection.
Yes, so now
Okay,
we have,
so a good one.
Yeah.
Now what do we do?
So we have gone down the line one time, and we're coming all the way up, and we're number 4, so you have to wait until we get up to number 4. And this is kind of how the screen is left.
I picked 503.
Yes, I would pick 503 as well if they were left on the field. But this is kind of who's left out on the field. As you see here, we have a really great exchange bot out in the field, 5927, right? I think they were gone. Oh.
They were there. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, so
You didn't raise your hand for Fort Field.
so these are the teams that were left on the field. And at this point, we see that there's still climbers left out on the field as well. What we were looking for was someone who would complement our autonomous and complement our climb, because in terms of scale, we thought that 503 and us had it fairly under control, right? And we wanted to look for a robot who had a pretty consistent autonomous in regards to the switch, and so that way, or the scale, but there aren't really scale robots left with autonomouses like that. And so we were looking for really a robot who can competently do the switch as well in autonomous, and then climb as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, 5927 is, I think it was because of the climb. 5927. We were looking for a climbing robot. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't climb, which is why we are. So we put them lower, generally.
No, they had one of the best exchange outputs there, actually. But we were looking for a climbing robot in particular for our third pick because while 503 and us do climb, 503 felt that it would be more valuable, and we felt that it would be more valuable to have a robot that can climb with us. And so that way, one of us can stay behind in the last 30 seconds and continue to do exchange or switch based upon who we're going, the switch or the scale based upon who we're going up against. Because as we saw earlier, the first 3 alliances were like really powerful scale alliances, and we wanted to be able to combat that in the last 30 seconds as well. So we went ahead and picked team number 6548, who are pretty good climbers, and they also, but they had a compatible climb with 503. We already had that established, and that they had a pretty good exchange and scale output. So they were a pretty balanced robot, and that's who we ended up going for.
So this is a good point. And by the way, the conversation that we just have is taking place between Shavina and her alliance partner while everybody else in the gym is waiting, right?
Yes.
So
And it took me a while for this.
so right. So the use of Tableau, we have found aids in the speed of coming to these conclusions because you can sort and cut and so forth very quickly. Right. So what you saw there is sorry. Go ahead.
Well, we all have, okay, so I make, at the beginning of the season, I kind of make this like Tableau like worksheet, we call it. So it's like a compiled version of all these spreadsheets that you've seen, all these visualizations that you've seen. And then I'll distribute it to all the kids that are under me on the sub. They're not shorter than me. All of them are taller than me, but I'll distribute it to all the kids on on the sub team, and then we all have the same data, so Tableau will automatically visualize it in the same way. Yes, but signal once again is a problem. Connectivity is a problem on the field, so typically you're out there alone, afraid.
With the MSC, again, was there any texting available? There was like no connectivity in that building. It was
Right.
a big Faraday cage. It was.
And then I get a call. I get like 15 calls when I like finally get into a signal area. Like, where are you? We've called you like 15 times. Where are you? It's like, I don't know. It's not coming through. Anyways, so that's kind of it.
Can I? There were. Well, of course, any questions, but I know that I saw a number of Tableau users, right? So we can, have an interactive discussion here. What are some of the, visualizations that you used? We're showing somewhat, the baseline of what you can do very quickly. Go ahead.
It comes with your kit of parts. Yep.
Yeah, we'll show. Thank you very much for bringing that. There's a slide here at the end. We'll point that out as well. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions? Yes. Right. So to determine what your team needed as a complementary robot, right? Uh-huh. That's a great point. Yeah. We decided to do desktop not because Tableau Public is a great resource. Online. Oh, okay. So it's a great resource. We decided to use desktop primarily because a lot of the competitions we went to don't have signal, and we knew that from Michigan State the year before. Right.
Great, thanks. I also have the mic here. Who do we want to go next here?
One of the I can't say it.
Visualization.
Yeah, thank you. That we like to use, you guys also use it, is a scatter plot, but we add a lot more aspects to it. We focus on using a x-axis of exchange, how many they put in the exchange throughout the match, and a y-axis of cubes on scale. And then the points, we actually size them, so make them bigger if they put more into the switch. And we use color for climbing aspect. And we have a separate thing for autonomous because we haven't quite figured out how to combine that into there. But I've heard a lot about, just like what people were talking about, connectivity with the things. We don't use any of the things you mentioned. We actually created a website database, which automatically transfers all of the data into Tableau live. So when we enter in the data we borrow iPads from our school for 6 iPads, and you can just connect it on your phone, anything, as long as you are connected to the database. You can automatically access everything and see everything, and it just transfers it live. Yeah.
You go ahead and get started for it. Take care of this side.
So kind of like this, right? Yes. Yeah. No, I went through the process of kind of just to build it really quickly. Yeah.
All right.
I'm missing the color aspect of it, but yeah.
Sorry. So how effective do you think just collecting data on how many cubes a team puts in the switch is, considering the variability of this year's game? I know in my team's personal experience, we found just collecting, at our first regional, we found that just collecting the amount of cubes in the switch was not really in a super effective way for us to determine who would be the best scale bot for us. We were weaker when it came to scale. We could do it, but there were plenty of teams better than us. But we eventually decided to make a scouting app that revolved around collecting cycle times so that we could see how many cubes a team has the potential to place, because a team probably isn't going to place 9 cubes in the scale, for example, every match, but if you're just collecting data on how many cubes they place in the scale, that isn't exactly going to be reflected. So
We collect every 45 seconds. So while we have an aggregate of all the total scale, the scale output or switch output or exchange output, we also collect how much do they get in the first 45 seconds, the next 45 seconds, and the 45 seconds after that, which gives us a rough idea of their cycle time. We just wanted, because cycle time can vary so much dependent upon what challenges you're encountering. So your cycle time when unhindered can be way less than your cycle time when you're, say, being faced with a defensive robot. So using that that was rather an analysis of strategy. We kind of looked more at, hey, given all of these elements, given an element of a normal game, kind of what is their capability? And the trends and the box and whisker plots allow us to have a more effective understanding of that as well.
Oh, we also went ahead and used maximum, the max I've ever done, because generally speaking, if you're doing the scale, one match, you can go ahead and do 10 one match, but not every match do you need to do a full-on shootout where you put 3 on and the other people just give up. So then what are you going to penalize you for not showing off that time when you didn't need to? So we used that, and then we also started using whisker plots, because then they also showed you the upper quartile as well, to give you the gist of when they encounter things that are sort of difficult but not too difficult, and it would allow you to show what they can do rather than what they always do.
Yeah,
And,
whisker plots seem very useful in this scenario. Like, just yeah, we had difficulty with calculating outliers for example, Steamworks, like because like for the most part we just calculated average gears, average fuel, average climb time. So yeah, experimenting with all this has proved to be very successful for us. So.
Thank you. Would anyone on this side here want to? Yeah, yeah. Okay.
There's one ahead, if that's okay.
So something that I guess you guys haven't really talked about is comments. Do you guys do comments in scouting? And if you do, like, are they important to you? I mean, we're rookies, so we don't really know what we're doing anyway, but we found that comments are really important for us when we're doing, collecting data for alliance strategies and stuff.
We do comments. They're right here. Like, no tele-op opponent control, or, they just essentially, like, we do get comments. But we have a qualitative scouting team as well, because they have to take a look at essentially things like, hey, like, we can't really scout the drive team capability. Like, we can't be like, this drive team was clumsy, that can't be a data point. So we have our qualitative team, which Riley heads up, scout, things like that.
Yeah, like for example, thank you. So like, one of the examples, like with our climbing mechanism, we've figured that teams with a more rigid climbing structure is a little bit more likely to actually get onto our rungs. And so I was just watching out for those things, write a little comment there. Or overall, is their robot extremely unstable? Because in the actual data, you can't really have those little comments. But we do have a comment section on the actual app as well for people to put in. But typically, it's not super analyzed when they're watching it. They're more focused on just clicking the buttons and those things. So that's why we have a secondary qualitative team. Yeah.
Yes?
Hey there. I'd be curious about the technique you're using to get the data from your app into either Tableau or your master spreadsheet before that spreadsheet goes into Tableau.
I can't personally speak to that process, like at least the programming process. It's all done via programming. I can have after the session is over, I'm sure Nolan can speak to that. Yes. Oh
No,
no. Oh,
no.
sorry. Yeah, we connect directly into the tablets. A computer connects directly into the tablets, and we use a software called Android File Transfer to pull from the tablets themselves onto the laptop, and then onto thumb drives to distribute to all the scouters, the strategists.
Mm-hmm.
Right, there are adapters for that as well. Yep.
Mm-hmm. All right, question?
Here, why don't we cover one from
Yeah,
this side?
we'll have
since
someone from over here.
Reaching, yeah.
I just have a quick question about like what you analyze. So like we're a rookie team also, and like right now we're just scouting the autonomous and like how many cubes they place in the scale switch, can they climb, and how fast they are. Like what else would you recommend to look at?
Well, you're looking at all the elements of the autonomous as well?
No, not specifically, no.
I would split up autonomous because it's a different, like the values are different based on like whether they're doing a scale autonomous or a switch autonomous. Make sure you scout baseline, because I know a lot of teams think like, everyone can do baseline, so there's no point in scouting it, but because it's the ranking point, it's so important, really. So it's definitely scout baseline.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, and I would also add that one of the things we do is we separate out when we're looking at the data the actual scale parts versus the rest of the things, because they're almost two different games. Because if one game your role on the team is to focus on actually doing the switch or the exchange we separate those out because sometimes you can be doing those, and that's also why we look at the trend data to see if you switched roles during one game or not.
I can't claim to be an expert on this. I don't think any of us can
Yeah.
claim to be experts on exactly what you should collect because that really is team-to-team discussion, I think, right? Yep. Yes?
All right. All right, so how long does it take to make all the graphs? Could it potentially shorten a late night pick list meeting? Or?
It definitely shortens the late night pick list meeting. That also depends upon who's there, though, because let me tell you, our coach can talk and talk and talk and talk.
I have lots of questions.
Yes, he has lots of questions. But at the end of the day, yeah, it does help with that, I think, because I wasn't there prior to when we were using Tableau. Maybe Mr. Rain, you can talk about how much time it's taken off, but it speeds up the process a lot more because, like I showed you guys earlier, like when I was running through the example of the alliance selection and how that would go, I went through and I can go, okay, so to say that's out of order, I press one button and all the teams are ordered and listed based exactly upon their ranking in that capability or in that element. So it's really beneficial in that sense. So you're not like calculating and manually listing out exactly what they're best at. So that's great.
I don't know if the meeting is shorter, but we are talking about, or
It's
maybe
more
more productive.
efficient.
It may be more productive
Yeah.
5 hours. I don't
Right.
know.
Because yeah.
Well, actually, I was wondering, for defense, for instance, it's kind of hard to have an idea using just spreadsheets of what the impact is on the game. So how, as a team, do you make sure that that kind of an impact is represented in your numbers?
We cover defense in two ways. We kind of identify the main forms of defense ahead of time in that planning stage, and based upon that, we create variables that we can scout in the app. But we also, in terms of say a team is extremely effective at defense regardless of how they do it, Riley and his team of students will collect that as well through qualitative scouting, correct?
Yeah. Oh, there's you? Okay, yeah.
It's just he hasn't gone. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll give you the mic here. Sorry, I didn't see that.
We actually, I just took a look. We might have to watch the clock. We have wrap-up slides here, so we need to actually go to that because there's just some information that we want to make sure that we share.
Okay. How many students are there?
5?
Well, it's kind of like we have sectors, I guess. I'm overall strategy and scouting captain. But everyone goes through the scouting process at least once. So technically, I get all the freshmen and sophomores through my wing at least once. And then we also have Riley under him has 2-3 kids, right? And then during the planning stage, there can be 6-7 kids. And then during our the Tableau, there's 5 of us who have the program to work with through the entire match, through the entire tournament. Oh, right, yeah. So we have 6 people scouting at all times.
Oh, well, then maybe I can try to answer. So we have 42 students on the team. As part of a stepwise process of being on a team, we want everyone to spend time in strategy or scouting at one time or another, and they may choose to stay on because it's in their interest or team needs and so forth. Generally speaking, we have, I would say, 6 students who are working this process of, from planning phase into, app development is a little bit different. And it also, as a coach, I might add, what I see happening for our team, there are more and more students who are coming to us that are adept in programming, right? And also want to pursue, more and more programming. So this is an area where if we have those types of students, and to program your own app is an outlet that then we can then go pursue and have a good learning experience for our students to develop in Java or whatever the case may be. So as we see more and more of those types of students come to us, this is an area where they can experience greater programming and so forth for themselves. So this was kind of not including the programming side of it, but 6 students, let's just say. Go ahead. Oh, well, was that an add-on to the comment, or is it a different question? Excellent. Thank you for the comment. Was there another?
And just something I wanted to add on the whole, what you can do with Tableau. Our team was able to visualize the auton paths of robots through data points, and so we have our scouts draw them out, and you can see what paths they can do, so you can see if you can work with the robot. And that's just one of the things you can do with Tableau, and among the many other things that you're able to do with it. So.
Yep, this was Team 1640. I have that right, from Philadelphia. They're also one of the early adopters of Tableau and have done some fantastic things with it. Yeah. Can we? Got to
wrap this up.
We do have to wrap up. I mean, this is just like work. We can stay if nobody's going to kick us out of the room.
Very impressed this many people showed up, by the way.
Yeah, we feel a kinship with anybody who's interested in scouting strategy. Go ahead. Let's make sure we get the finish up slides here.
Okay. Pretty simple. As was mentioned earlier, everybody can download Tableau Desktop. It's in the kit of parts. Little key. What? Oh. Those are there. We will give a copy of this thing out just because I'm whipping through this at the moment. OPRs. Running out of time here. Everybody know what OPR is? It's a great calculation. You know, it's a way to figure out averages based on each team's third thing. We're not going to calculate right now. But they're very useful for figuring out use in most years. This year it wasn't nearly as useful though, because, and I know why, and that's because the scale tips back and forth. And there's a maximum on each side. So if teams all have an OPR of 135, because they always have the scale, what they add together, they're not going to get 500 points because they can't. That's basically what this slide is about. CCWM, that actually helped a lot more this year, which is the calculated contribution to winning margin. That is that your team, when you're out there, you usually win by this many points, or you help your team win by, your alliance win by this many points. These are all backing into calculations because there's no direct thing, because it's alliance scores, as everybody knows. It's not single robot scores. Here's our resources, this is the important thing. Team2834.com, that's us, /resources. We got a font issue, so we got a slight problem here, but not a big deal. Tableau.com, the first robotics, that's where you get your piece. Again, the Team 2834 scouting database, that's something we've had for years of just all stats for everyone, and EPRs calculated out for you. It's a very good resource. And I'm not sure what Team 180 is. What was that last one?
It's a scouting PDF that if you're paper scouting, it has some viable options to it. It's a good option.
For rookie teams, Team 180 scouting PDF piece.
And then there's the app suggestion thread. Speaking to an earlier point about the Tableau Online, I actually have an account on Tableau Online. It's easy to access in terms of trials. If you have students, it's free to students, so you can apply rather through the FRC median through the Tableau student median, and that way you get the online account as well. It's how I hook up my personal Tableau to my tablet. Yeah. Oh, maybe. It's for college students as well. Right. So once you graduate, you can continue to kind of build your skill with Tableau.
Okay, so this, I guess this officially, ends the presentation. Here's another way to get in touch with us. Anybody who has their laptops, unless we're going to get kicked out of here, wants to come up and show their Tableau and what they've done, can certainly come up and do that. We're always interested to take a look. All right, thanks everybody.